Behind me is the new Lexus GX460. It's the current generation Lexus GX. And today I'm going to share with you how to get the most power out of your Lexus GX460. So to understand how to get the most power out of your Lexus GX460, we first need to do a little bit of a historical backdrop. And this essentially revolves around our American culture. If you grew up in America, your parents and their parents most likely drove a big block V8, Chevy, Ford, Chrysler, etc. And these V8 engines by design had push rods in them. And these push rods, which opened and closed the valves, essentially limited the RPMs of the drivetrain. So in these older V8 engines, you typically had a power band that was very narrow and very down in the RPM range. Okay? So the way to drive those vehicles was to shift very quickly, because the power band was down low in the RPMs. Along came Japanese manufacturers, 60s, 70s, 80s, and they introduced an entirely different ideology on engines and engine RPMs. What they introduced was a racing-inspired four-cylinder engine. And these four-cylinder engines had overhead camshafts, no more valve lifters, okay, or push rods, I should say. And what this did, this overhead camshaft on these four-cylinder engines, was allowed the engines to basically rev higher. And in doing so, the power band was moved up the RPM range. Now, what does this have to do with your Lexus GX460 and getting more power out of it? Well, quite simply, people, not all, but many people, especially Americans, don't really know how to exploit this 4.6 liter V8 engine in the Lexus GX460 that's right behind me. What you have to understand about this engine is that it comes from the Japanese culture and the Japanese ideology, and not the old school American pushrod ideology. What that means is the engineers at Toyota and Lexus designed this engine, which incidentally was designed by Yamaha. That's kind of an open secret. All Toyota engines are designed by Yamaha, which of course has a high revving racing history behind it. But anyway, the ideology behind this 4.6 liter V8 engine is one of high revving. This is not subjective. This engine, if you look at its specs on paper, will make its peak torque at around 3,300 RPM, and then its peak horsepower around 5,500 RPM. Thus, the power band is connecting when the peak torque begins and when the peak horsepower begins, or ends, whatever you want to say. Peak torque, peak horsepower. And the RPM range for this vehicle, this 4.6 liter V8 designed by Yamaha, is around 3,300 RPM to 5,500 RPM. So you can see where I'm going with this. The power band is high on these engines. And if you want to get the maximum power, literally, out of this engine, you have to exploit the engineered power band of the vehicle. This may be tricky for you if you're an American and you think revving a V8 engine or any engine is going to blow it up, harm it, overheat it, hurt the valve train, or any other such fears. This is completely false. There is a red line on this car around, I believe, 6,000 or a little bit under 6,000 RPMs. And believe me when I say that is a conservative red line. A safety margin has been added into the engine already. They engineered it with a red line that's truly up here, but they brought it down, so what you see on your gauge is actually a conservative, safe red line. The engine will have no problem going to the red line. Now, am I advocating getting more power out of driving like a maniac. Of course not. That's not what this is about. It's not about driving fast. It's about, you were promised by Lexus 300 horsepower of this thing, and you will not realize that 300 horsepower unless you actually use the power band where the 300 horsepower actually is. So if you're not doing that, you're actually cheating yourself out of 300 horsepower. You're not getting, or experiencing, I should say, what Lexus engineers wanted you to experience. Now, of course, you're not going to use 300 horsepower in all situations, but more than likely, you've probably never used 300 horsepower. You might have used 200, you might have used 150, or something less than 300, but you've never actually hung around in that 300 horsepower power band. So the main idea, and we're going to take this out in a second, and I'm going to demonstrate, behind what I want to share today, is that you must trust the high revving engine. This is nothing new. This 4.6 V8 behind me is essentially two 2.3 liter four bangers connected in a V configuration. Now, everybody's familiar with the 2.3, around there, 1.6 to 2.3 liter four cylinder Japanese overhead cam engine. Hondas have them, Toyota's had them in their cars, all sorts of Japanese manufacturers, what am I missing, Nissan, etc., had these small four cylinders. So these have two. My point is, when they were four cylinders, 2.3 liter four cylinders, their red lines would be up there around 6,000 or 6,500 RPMs, and they have been proven to be able to hang out in that red line forever without any ill effects. So in order to get the most out of this, in order to have the fun we're about to have, and the fun you're about to have, once you find out how to do this, you gotta use the available power band and trust that it's not going to harm your engine. That's an American cultural mythology that's held over from the old pushrod days. These engines can handle it, and I'll argue that it's even good for them. There's two camps. People who think high revving engines are going to destroy the engine, and the other camp thinks high revving engines are health food for the engine. I am in the latter, and the Toyota engineers are definitely in the latter, because on paper their power band is at 5,500 RPMs. We're going to go out in a second and do that, but you gotta trust that your engine's going to be okay, that your red line is conservative. If you think back, remember red lines? Before the red line, they used to have kind of a yellow line. Remember that? Some older cars had that yellow line. Your red line on this car is actually really the yellow line. So you're A-okay to hang out in higher RPMs to get the most out of your GX, which is that 300 horsepower that you're not using. So enough babble. I think you get the idea. Let's go out and actually see how to get that 300 horsepower. Okay, so you can probably see where I'm going with this, and that is, in order to get the most power out of your GX, you've got to use the manual mode, which is down here. And that may or may not seem interesting, but you'll see here in a second, we're going to go up an uphill grade that's relatively windy for the area. And that's a perfect situation where we want to maximize the power output from your GX460. So here we are, we're about to go up and windy. And I have it in drive right now, which is great. But again, this video is about those who want to maximize and get the power out of what Toyota engineers designed into this 4.6 liter V8 engine. In order to do that, we're going to have to switch down into manual mode and really stay in this power band. So I'm not even at 2,000 RPMs here, and we're slowly starting to go uphill. I'm in drive still. But let's say this is not enough for you, or you just want to get the most power out of your car. going to switch down here, and the way you switch into manual mode is to take your hand and just move the shifter towards the left or the driver's side, and you're instantly going to drop down from drive into the next what the car thinks is the next gear that you want, the next downshift gear or lower gear that you want. So we're going uphill now. I'm going to hit it, and it puts us in fourth gear, but it only puts me down in 2,000 RPM. So let's drop down to third. Now look at this power. Suddenly, this thing is ridiculous. And it gets fun real quick, because the power band, like stated earlier, is in a higher band, but or a higher rev range. But we didn't really even get that much revs in third gear here. We're in third gear here, but it's still at the speed near 3,000, not even 3,000 RPM, so right under 3,000 RPMs. So we're in third gear now. We're about to go up another hill. I'm still in third gear, just cruising. I'll put it in drive for a second here, and then we're going to drop it down to second gear, so we could really stay in the RPM range of around 4 grand to red line. Yes, red line. Part of doing this, again, is going to have to be your comfort level with exploiting that power band and being near the rev line, and knowing that this engine can handle high RPMs. So we're a bit of a flat section. Here comes the uphill, and we're going to drop it down into second gear to really show. Here comes a 4Runner. We're really going to show what this thing can do and what the power band is all about. Once you keep it up in that 4,000 to 5,000 redline-ish RPM. So big hill here. Take it down to fourth. Third puts us 3. Let's go down to second. Now we're gonna up she goes. And you could stay here, and you've got a race car engine, or you could go up to third. But this is your power. Listen to this engine. You go down to second again. Won't let you. Won't do the money shift. Let's try again. And now I'm at 5 grand, over 5 grand. And this thing is just singing. I hope you can hear that V8. And I'm not even a V8 person, but let me tell you, between this and KDSS, now I'm in second gear. This is the power band. This is your 300 horsepower. That's what it wants. Okay, so this is what it's like to drive a GX460 and this 4.6 right at red line. And that's your power band. You can let off from the gas and just bring it back. And if you run out of power band, just go up to third gear. Or in this case, put it back into drive, because that's the end of the hills and the up and down, at least on this section. So there's your power band. And you have to ask yourself the question, are you using all of the available power band in your Lexus GX460? The drive mode and the shift points in drive are set up for eco. There's a little green leaf on the dash here, and it shifts at around 4 grand or less, sometimes a little higher, but generally speaking, it's going to shift around 4 grand to save or to get you the best gas mileage, and that's great. Obviously, what I just did is not good for gas mileage, but it's good for the car. Okay, some may not agree with it, but I do. It's called the Italian tune-up. But anyway, let's backtrack. Let's at least be fair and say it's not going to hurt the car. That red line that I was just hanging around in is a conservative value, and the engine can handle it. It loves it. It's got overhead cams just like any Japanese 4-banger, and it loves being revved up like that. Now, is it about driving fast, driving like a hooligan? Absolutely not. What I just did was an extreme example in order to demonstrate that there is more potential available if you go ahead and use this manual mode down here the way it was intended. That's why they put the manual mode down here. You know, that's why it exists. So when you're going up and down hills like this, or you're lugging up a long uphill type of drive, and the vehicle's just loaded up and you don't have enough passing power and this sort of thing, and you just feel sluggish, that's what this manual shift mode is. It will get you into your fun mode. So we just drop down, let's drop down in third again. Now we're back on twisties and we're all over. Now you don't have to go extreme down to the second gear unless you want. Unless you want to do this. Yeah, you have a ridiculous amount. This is your 300 horsepower. And you hear this engine singing. you've got all this power. So match it up to what you're doing and what mood you're in. Now you don't have to be in second gear to do this, but I am sailing up these hills with the full 300 horsepower, or whatever it is, 301, 2 horsepower that Lexus provides. Put it back in the drive, and you're good to go. So, at the risk of sounding lame or repetitive, and I didn't mean to just teach you how to use manual mode here, the moral of the story, the whole point of this video was to remind you that the power band is an objective thing. It's not a pretend thing. It's engineered, it's specified, and the normal drive mode, in other words, in drive, will not exploit the power band. The drive mode is set to exploit maximum fuel efficiency, not maximum power. So if you're looking to get the full potential, those full 300 or so horses out of your car, in situations where you deem it's appropriate, go ahead, use manual mode, drop it down to whatever gear suits you, enjoy that power, and don't be afraid of kissing that red line. Guarantee you this car and this engine can handle it. 0 doubts. If you found this video the least bit helpful, please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you, and have a good day.